Hi, this is the Philosophical Angle, and I'm your host, Chris Angle. The purpose of the Philosophical Angle is to analyze the nature and essence of concepts being used in current media. And with me is my co-host, Rick Samuelson. Rick's a venture capitalist out there on the West Coast, and I'm here in the New York area. Good to see you, Rick.
Good to see you. Merry Christmas.
And the subject this week is the terror that has happened in Paris and San Bernardino. So let's start. First, let's go to a little diagram I've prepared. And we want to know why there was a massacre in Paris and San Bernardino, and why is Islamic terror proceeding? Why do they initiate it? And significantly enough, you notice that there is no outpouring of rage and concern from Muslim countries. They even state that they will strike the U.S. soon. And they even name the places: Washington, D.C. and New York City. So they're quite brazen and confident. And we're going to examine why that is, and why they export terror from wherever they are. Well, we're going to examine a little bit about the history of terror emanating out of the Middle East, and we're going to discuss the nature of Islam. Well, the nature of Islam obviously comes from the Quran, which means a recital, and it recites the words of the angel Gabriel as told to the Prophet Muhammad. And if you read the entire Quran, you'll notice that there are some passages that are relevant to terrorism. And a fundamental reading of the Quran, you can notice that there are three types of passages that are relevant to terrorism worldwide. The first are the ones that are directly request of the follower of Islam to fight in the name of Allah. And the second type of passage is one that where fighting is noted to be necessary and prescribed for the follower of Islam. And a third type of passage in the Quran indicate that there is a preferential system in paradise whereby those who fight are rewarded to a greater degree than those who do not fight. And so we'll give you a couple examples of each type of passage in the Quran. From Surah 48, verse 29, Muhammad is the apostle of Allah, and those who follow him are harsh to the unbelievers, but merciful to one another. And an example of the second type, from Surah 2, verse 244, then fight in the cause of Allah, and know that Allah heareth and knoweth all things. And thirdly, fighting is prescribed for you, and you dislike it. But it is possible that you dislike a thing that is good for you, and that you love a thing which is bad for you. But Allah knoweth, and ye know not. From Quran, Surah 2, verse 216. And also, we might examine Surah 4, verse 95, which talks about the discrepancy between those who fight in the name of Allah and those who just go about their daily lives and in support of those who fight. Not equal are those of the believers who sit at home, except those who are disabled by injury or are blind or lame, and those who strive hard and fight in the cause of Allah with their wealth and their lives. Allah has preferred in grades those who strive hard and fight for their wealth and their lives above those who sit at home. Unto each Allah has promised goodness, that is paradise. But Allah has preferred those who strive hard and fight above those who sit at home by a huge reward. And this provides the incentive to fight. So now let's go to page 2 of our diagram. And so you can see that if a person reads the Quran, if he reads it in a fundamental way and takes the literal meaning of these words, and it's not hard to, they're pretty clear. It means that most of those who read the Quran, they recognize the necessity of the fighter to spread Islam. And although most followers of Islam participate in commerce, a certain percentage of those who read the Quran, given a fundamental reading, it's going to produce a certain percentage of fighters. And all those who study the Quran, they recognize that these fighters are necessary to the spread of Islam and the spread of the Holy Quran. And thus there is really no outcry, and that's why you don't have an outcry from the general world of the general Islamic community throughout the world. And you notice that when we were selecting some passages for you to understand in a fundamental reading of the Quran, you notice that they were open-ended imperatives. It wasn't just like, oh, fight these people, or fight at this time, or when you have to do this. They're open-ended. You're to fight. You're to fight the unbeliever. And if you're not a member of the Islamic community, you're the subject of a battle. So in general, the Quran exhorts its followers to fight for Allah and against the unbelievers. So a fundamental reading produces a percentage of fighters, and thus you get armies like ISIL, as President Obama likes to call them. Others like to call them ISIS. And you also get terrorism. Now, it's kind of an interesting question of why terrorism? Why not like other armies of the past and throughout history? They fight, they conquer, they stay, they establish their colonies, etc. But here we have a significant portion of the Islamic community coming out with terrorism, and it's an interesting question. So let's examine that here. Before we do this, page 3, before we look at examples of history, let's go to some more. So if you take the Quran, specifically Surah 8, verse 12, it actually states terror. I will cast terror into the hearts of those who disbelieve. Therefore, strike off their heads and strike off every fingertip of them. So the Quran actually uses and exhorts terror. It exhorts punishment. Quran, Surah 5, verse 33. The punishment of those who wage war against Allah and His Messenger and strive to make mischief in the land is only this, that they should be murdered or crucified, for their hands and their feet should be cut off on opposite sides, or they should be imprisoned. This shall be a disgrace for them in this world and in the hereafter. They shall have a grievous chastisement. And the Quran exhorts those followers of Islam to cause pain. Quran Surah 4, verse 104. And be not weak-hearted in pursuit of the enemy. If you suffer pain, then surely they too suffer pain, as you suffer pain. And they are incentivized to fight, as per Surah 8, verse 39. And fight with them until there is no more fitna, which is disorder or unbelief, and religion should be only for Allah. Which means really that all become believers in Allah. Also Quran Surah 8, 65. O Prophet, exhort the believers to fight. And along with terror comes fear. And this is explicitly dealt with in the Quran in Surah 8, verse 57. If thou comest on them in the war, deal with them so as to strike fear in those who are behind them, that haply they may remember. So let's go, here we go. Now let's deal with a little bit of history of, let's do a little bit of history study here. The history of the, not only, so you can see from a fundamental reading that the Islamic community, right from the start, right from the death, really from the life of Muhammad from 620 on, he started to make war upon his area tribes and convert them to his Islamic beliefs. And it started really with the Battle of Badr. And I think I misspelled it here, B-A-K-E-R. That's actually it should be B-A-D-R, I think. And the Battle of Badr was significant because Muhammad was up against tremendous odds. He had a little force up against a big force, and he won. And when he won, despite these overwhelming odds, he believed that he was ordained for great things. And thus his little band of followers also felt so too. And so that even today that translates into the Islamic belief that they are invincible, that ultimately they will prevail. And so this pervades even after the death of Muhammad. Although they did lose some battles, and they continued to lose some, but from the Battle of Badr, this belief reigns supreme. And their crusade came out of the Middle East and first went all throughout North Africa, pillaging and striking fear into the hearts of all the communities, taking them over and converting them to Islam. Quite a lot of bloodshed in those, and they did it very easily because there were no standing armies at the time to stop them. And so the spread went all throughout North Africa into Spain, and boy, it was in Spain for what, 700 years, 800 years, and they went all the way up to the gates of Paris, all the way to Tours, France, and were finally driven back by Charles Martel at the Battle of Poitiers in 732. And then on the other side, later on, they made forays into Europe. The sack of Constantinople happened, and then, well, that was in the 700s, and was it, or the 800s? I forgot. And from there, they went on to the gates of Vienna, where they were stopped. Had this battle been won by the Muslims in 1661, on September 11th, 1661, Europe would probably be speaking Arabic. They were Jan the Pole defeated them at the gates of Vienna, and so they receded. They sacked Rome in what was it, 824, I think. So their crusades to Rome, to Vienna, to Tour de France, into Spain, they've had many crusades, and today they're on another crusade, a terroristic crusade. And this is exemplified by recent events in Paris and San Bernardino. So let's bring Rick in here to see what his comments are. Rick, any comments about the disasters and the proceedings of terror by the Islamic State into Europe and to the United States?
Well, I guess the pressing question at the moment is what, if anything, Western government will do or plan to do or believe they have the scope to do to oppose this violence, this undermining of civil order, and as well how they deal with this flood of refugees, which comes on the back of violence in the Mideast, particularly in the context of there being numerous Europeans and Americans who've embedded themselves into these Muslim armies. Some have returned, obviously. They were responsible for the violence in France. It raises the whole specter of recent immigrants, like the wife of the Pakistani American who committed the violence, the crimes, the shootings in San Bernardino. There's a whole laundry list, really, of public policy issues that surround how to respond. Donald Trump has called for a ban on Muslim immigration and, by extension, any Muslim travel to the United States. I'm sympathetic to that. We talked about a moratorium on Muslim immigration some months ago. I think that should be instituted immediately. It's pretty obvious that the United States doesn't know how to screen these people. That was sadly apparent with the wife of who participated in the San Bernardino murders. She came in on a spouse visa with no major questions raised. We saw that with the Massachusetts Boston Marathon violence, bombings, shootings, where refugees were taken into the United States and repaid us by killing and maiming hundreds of people. So, to my mind, until there's a reliable government method for vetting people, there must be a moratorium on Muslim immigration, and to do otherwise than to make protecting the lives of Americans the supreme priority is, to me, unconscionable, actually. We have no constitutional obligation to accept any immigrants. That's the starting point for any discussion of this. If we have a group of immigrants who have a pattern of committing violence, then in fact we are obligated prevent that from happening by any means we can.
What would be the nature of that obligation?
Well, the the whole point of social stability is to ensure that your citizens can live safely, enjoy their lives, protect their families, um, all the concepts that are found in the preamble to the Constitution, um, and allowing potential murderers into the country has to be superseded by that greater obligation as described in the preamble to the Constitution.
Right.
I,
So,
I
so
don't see any gray area there.
right. So this talk in the media about presidential candidate Don Trump's proclamation that we should have a moratorium on immigration of those who believe in Islam is an appropriate response.
Well, I think it is. He's probably gone too far in banning all Muslim travel to the United States. I mean, it doesn't make sense to ban, a Saudi Arabian ambassador from coming to the United States. That's counterproductive. But in terms of immigration, where these people can rapidly become embedded in the communities and serve as potentially sleeper agents or be radicalized or through some process cause harm, is absolutely unconscionable.
Hmm.
I'm surprised there isn't more condemnation of the government officials who were responsible for bringing in the Sarnath brothers who caused the Boston Marathon bombing, who allowed the wife of this Pakistani American to come in a couple of years ago, who have allowed other immigrants who've caused this kind of violence to come in. Why aren't these the government officials who are involved in this process held more personally responsible? I find the fact that there's no discussion surrounding that actually very strange.
Actually, no, no contrition at all by the government for their lacks of vigilance in this regard. So, is it possible for the government to do this? And because maybe it's not, and maybe that's why presidential candidate Don Trump's remark is an appropriate one. What do you think?
I think it's eminently possible for the government to do it. It's almost a matter of simply signing some legislation. It could be implemented very very quickly, and should be implemented very very quickly. The fact that so many Republicans, in addition to Democrats, of course, have reacted so I won't say violently, but certainly with such horror at the idea, really makes you wonder where the priorities of mainstream Republicans lie. Do those priorities lie with protecting Americans, American citizens, or do those priorities lie with being inclusive of as much diversity in the country as as possible, to the point of elevating this thrust toward policy thrust toward achieving diversity to a kind of state religion.
Hmm. Okay, so but more further to that, is the government capable of vetting the immigrant or the refugee or whatever you want to call them to the extent that we'll be allowed to be safe in our homes and in our society? Is the government capable of even doing this job?
Well, the head of the FBI, Mr. Comey, is on record saying there is no possible way for them to vet the Syrian refugees for the following reason. In failed states, for starters, the databases you rely on for the information surrounding these people, for the most part, don't exist. And so he has gone on record saying, particularly in the case of the Syrians, but also with other failed states in the Middle East, vetting is not possible or practical and can't be effective.
So, should Muslims then just not be allowed to come in? Muslims in general, of course, not. Obviously, there are, like you said, an ambassador must surely be allowed in, but Muslims in general?
Well, that raises a complicated issue because there are Muslims in France who may want to immigrate to the United States, for example, or England or elsewhere. So you differentiate between French Muslims versus Syrian Muslims. That's a point of nuance that would require further vetting and further discussion. Presumably, with French Muslims, you would have the data to be able to vet them, but I can't assume that's the case since France has certainly failed at vetting their
That's right.
French Muslims.
Belgium?
So, Belgians and so forth. What you could do immediately is ban immigration from selected countries, which pose a particular danger. That's been done before a number of times in U.S. history. There's ample precedent for it, and should be done again in this case.
We have just about a minute to go, so let me ask you one final question. Would it be just sufficient to be able to have them sign an oath saying that they do not believe in the fundamental violence passages of the Quran? Would that be sufficient?
Well, I think if an ISIS member embeds himself in amongst the Syrian refugees, as we've seen it done already in Europe, I would argue that they would quite happily sign anything in order to be given the opportunity to get through the immigration process and potentially plan an attack. So I don't see how. I would not take for granted that they would treat that oath seriously.
Okay. Well, that's about all the time we have for today. And Rick, thanks for being here. And I want to thank our viewers, and we'll see you next week at the Philosophical Angle.